So my name's Allison Price. I'm with the OpenInfra Foundation. I think I've probably talked to every single person in this room this week. So welcome to 5 p.m. We've made it, most of us. Kevin made it. Woo! So today we're going to be talking about unleashing AI with OpenInfra, the future of open source and artificial intelligence. So all the buzzwords, one headline. I'm moderating the panel, so I get to pepper these folks with questions. Some of who read the questions, some of who didn't. You'll see. But before we kick things off, I want to make sure everyone gets a chance to introduce themselves. So I'm going to pass it to Kevin.
Hey everybody, appreciate you all being here at 5. My name is Kevin Carter. I'm the product director for our OpenStack IVU at Rackspace, and I'm excited to be here and talk about buzzwords. So, we'll go right ahead.
We're buddies.
Evidently, I was supposed to read the questions. Ooh, see,
It's okay. It's going to make for a better panel.
Right. I'm Todd Robinson with OpenMetal, and OpenMetal is a on-demand private cloud provider, kind of unique in this space and being able to let people just have clouds and practice on them. So we have little tiny clouds, 3 servers, hyperconverged. Steph's underneath is providing the storage layer, but HA properly set up as much as everything could be at that size. But one of our things is that we allow people to come on and experience it and learn it based upon a configuration that has a standard that's been kind of burned in and tried and true. So hopefully those are helpful. If you do sign up for that, don't sign up with like a fake Gmail address and try to run Bitcoin mining on it. It's not cool. But definitely if you're interested and you're in that spot where you're trying to get into the space, we'd love people to learn, and that's why we built that thing.
Thank you so much. I'm Armstrong Foundjem. I'm a researcher from the University of Montreal, the engineering school called Polytechnic. So I research mostly on the trustworthiness of safety AI critical systems, which mostly we are working now with airline companies like Airbus, Bombardier, and the Boeing, and some of the other partners to build certification for AI systems in those systems, yeah.
Awesome. Well, welcome. So, one of the big things that we have all been talking about this week is the power of open source, whether it's OpenStack, Kubernetes, or the millions of other projects. So when you're looking at AI, which everyone's trying to build a strategy around, what are the actual benefits in your perspectives of open source solutions versus the proprietary ones from either the hyperscalers or other vendors out there? Oh yeah, right.
So that's a very interesting question, but I'll try to look from it from the open source machine learning world and see how open source software engineering can bring values. I remember quite well last year or so, we investigated the Hugging Face platform, and after doing some studies with the community, most of the works I did with OpenStack, I could suggest to the Hugging Face community some modifications and some benefits and best practices to make, which the work was published, and you could see it in the Hugging Face website. They accepted the paper from Sena last year. And now one of the things that we learned is software engineering is applied science. Machine learning could be theoretical, it could be mathematical, and most of them, be it computer scientists or mathematicians, they can write codes that can run, but not necessarily functional code that can be deployed. Now, most people who write codes that can print some output, things that they are software engineers. That's wrong. We need collaboration. Open source is a community. We need people from documentation, people from different aspects collaborating together. That aspect is missing in most platforms that are run by the modern day startups and things like that. Now, open source has these benefits that it has learned from diverse contributors across time. It has transparency that you can trace things back to their code base. Proprietary don't give you access to their code base, so they just tell you what you have to hear at their own terms and conditions. But open source has that transparency, accountability, and you can verify things. So security is also an important aspect that open source can leverage to the AI world or the machine learning community, which I found useful.
Yeah, I think I would just add that I think it's imperative that there is a really strong open source community around AI. Like to have some of these big, these giant companies just get bigger off of this technology and off of the data that they've scraped off the internet or that they pulled from you over time. I think that's a dangerous thing unless there's a strong offsetting community that embraces the open source aspect of what can be brought. And I'll also say like the creativity that the world at large can bring to these models or these businesses, it's different than if you're trying to, well, all I do is just grab OpenAI's API. Okay, you can do that, but then at what spot then is your business model? Is your business model always up here and never down at the fundamental level? And so for me, I think one is like I would say thank you to Facebook, which I wouldn't normally ever say thank you to Facebook, but they've been a great open source contributor, whether it's hardware, they've done hardware in the data center, they've done JavaScript frameworks, and they've also kind of led in releasing some of their so I don't know how particularly you would support them, but I wouldn't go on Facebook. But anyways, but I would just say I think we should be thankful for some of those companies that have led that way and said, look, yeah, we do believe in that, and then for us to get in there and use them and get familiar with them. And so I know I talked earlier, and there was just a board up about here's some of the stuff you've got to learn. Distillation, yep, you might have to learn. And it's kind of fun, to be honest. Like it's a new challenge for us. So I would just say it's imperative that we do get involved into it, and to have a community that's already formed, like an OpenStack community or any of these other ones, I think is great. So that's just my view on it.
Yeah, you cheated.
I did cheat intentionally. But I would also I would add, when you're talking about open source AI, you really can't take away from the conversation that's happening around DeepSeek and everything that's coming out around that. And whether you trust the DeepSeek as a model, you have to look at what they've done and make, kind of made it so that you're getting these, marked improvements in the models themselves and how you run things and how you work with things. At where, up until that point where they kind of came out onto the space and didn't ask for permission, distilled all of their disinformation against other models potentially, scraped all the same data or whatnot, but came up with a novel way of processing the data that didn't have such a reliance on the proprietary hardware. And so they are coming out with these capabilities that is really empowered by the open source community. And so if you take anything out of DeepSeek, even if you're fearful, I'm not going to use it, whatever. But if you take anything from that initiative, it is that AI is becoming more accessible. Whether you're running it on an M4 Mac or a latest and greatest NVIDIA GPU or some AMX from Intel or something, whether you're using all of these capabilities, the open source community is enabling those functions in new and exciting ways. And so I feel like that is, without the open source community, you would just be paying the proprietary platforms to get the new GPU, to run the new model that is being replaced every quarter. Which on top of the fact is, your exponential power cost and curve that comes up with all of that. So I think you can look at open source and they can say, sure, you can do all of that. And we can use all of those crazy pieces of hardware with these new open models, but also it's more accessible, right? Whether you're running it on an M2 Mac Pro or you're running it in a world-class data center.
Well, and I think the thing that was interesting from every single one of you, and I wish I had kept count, but I didn't, was that you each said community at least 2 or 3 times. And I think that's why we're all here. We're all members of the community, and I think that's what really innately drives progress from an open source perspective. And so I'm happy to kind of see that thread, because I think that's how NFV accelerated and open source became the de facto standard for NFV. And all these telcos run OpenStack and Kubernetes. And I think that HPC, thread with the community. The Scientific SIG is celebrating 10 years of collaboration this year. And so one of the things that the foundation has kicked off, and this is me just plugging a few things, is actually an AI working group, because I think that we're at the beginning, the very beginning of AI. We haven't seen anything yet, in my opinion. Like, we've seen some awesome stuff, and we've seen some real innovation, but there's so much more innovation to be had, and I think that the communities will accelerate that, and they'll exponentially grow it. So If you're not part of the AI working group, it's something that we're working with our foundation members around. Please find me. I'm temporarily leading it while I learn about AI. And then we're going to continue to work on it, publish a white paper this year about how is open source propelling AI faster and more effectively than proprietary solutions. So it's taking this panel, putting it in a white paper, coming to you soon. But you know, AI is massive, right? So I kind of want to distill it down with the panelists about some of the actual technical requirements. And you all have OpenStack experience. You have businesses that rely on OpenStack. So, you know, scaling compute, accelerated compute, scaling your storage, it's not insignificant. It's a massive challenge. And so I'm curious, how can open source, and specifically OpenStack, how can it best be used to address these challenges? Because those things historically have cost a lot of money, cost a lot of hours, bandwidth, teams. How can we as a community address that and make sure that OpenStack stays relevant in this growing market?
So I mean, yeah, at Rackspace, we have a bunch of AI workloads that are already running. We're running with H100s, A30s, P40s, a couple different accelerators on different, server platforms. And I think the thing that OpenStack enables us to do, specifically, because all of our GPU-enabled workloads are running on an OpenStack platform. And what OpenStack allows us to do is to attach those workloads to different VMs, different scopes, different sizes. Whether a customer is needing 2 GPUs or 4 GPUs or 1, I can schedule that intelligently. Now, I think one of the hardest parts is the scale of that, because you're looking at some of these boxes where you're getting 4 H100s in it, and it's using 14 kilowatts of power. And in the US at least, a lot of our racks are set up for like 16 kilowatts power max. So that's 1 box per rack, and that's difficult. You have to either come up with a new power strategy, or you have to come up with more efficient ways of hosting those workloads. Or you have to figure out a way to, again, extract more value out of the hardware that you're buying, right? Because, again, customers are looking for either fractional GPUs or whole GPUs. But with a lot of the models today, fractional GPUs don't make a ton of sense. They want the whole thing. They need all the horsepower that device can give them. In fact, they need many of them. And so, you're trying to figure out better ways to use these accelerators, get more density out of it, even in a case where you have 1 box per rack potentially, right? Which is kind of crazy if you use it break. It is totally ridiculous because, coming back from experience of running OpenStack public clouds, we used to run 22 hypervisors in a rack, and now you have this like one. It looks ridiculous when you walk around data center. You're like, that something doesn't look right. But nonetheless, but it's a problem, and that power draw is a problem.
Yeah, I think so. I'll agree definitely with Kevin on that. It's like you really got to understand the power consumption of some of these things, but also so for us, there's no perfect answer for sure. Like, so we don't have a specific strategy. We're forming our strategy now. And this is how we did it, and I think I would just share this with how I feel like we should be going forward a bit when it comes to OpenInfra and how we can learn this as we go. So in our case, what we do, if we don't know enough about something, so we get a couple workloads, we pick some businesses that are friendlies to us, and we share some information with them. We get some workloads going to make sure we understand what's going on. Then we start to say, all right, which of these can we focus on? Which ones can we productize? And so we've been doing that for a year and a half or so now, and we're now down to the spot where we're picking, okay, what are the racks actually going to look like? What's the gear that's coming? The H100s are $25,000 a piece, right? So you really don't want to mess that up. If you buy a whole bunch of them, it's not a good idea. And so, but I think the thing that may help us for OpenInfra as a community is trying to get more visible use cases. What are people doing with it? And then that drives where we need to focus our energy so that we can decide this. And actually, some of the comment is like, in some cases, we both provide bare metal and automated OpenStack. And sometimes the customer just says, give me the bare box. Yeah. Because it's a fully load, they have it's going to consume the GPU resources. That one application that they're running is going to consume the whole shot. And so Ironic comes in, so OpenStack is still in there. Ironic is still doing it. But actually, it's not being orchestrated by kind of in OpenStack. It's being provided by. And so we haven't seen a lot of, we know how to do the MIGs, and we know how to do the time scaling, but that actually hasn't come up that much. People are using the CPU, because it's like really simple. And like I think I had said in my other talk is you probably have CPU in your cluster already. Like almost everybody, actually I think it was Rackspace who did this. Like, you know that setting, it's like 12 or 16 to 1 or whatever for the,
16 to 1.
yeah, this is you guys.
Overcommit ratio.
Right, it's overcommit ratio, right? But nobody, but people still go out there and they sell, you know, the 4 vCPUs against 8 gigs, and so you burn up your RAM and you end up with leftover CPU. So use it. Yeah, so in some cases it's just recognizing you can get into it, start using some of the models, get familiar with the lingo, start getting close to your customers so they'll tell you this is what I'm trying to do with it. And it goes all the way from, we've got one coming in that's trying to correct a cost for natural language processing. They're using AWS as transcribed, and it's just like, whoa, this has gone absurd, right? So now they have to figure out how to do that. But that's not an OpenStack thing, but it does teach you, okay, maybe this is the space we're gonna be in, this is how we're gonna do it. Yeah, there we go. I don't know if I answered it very well, but.
You did, but you set me up for something, and so I'm going to pass it to Armstrong. Is this on? Right? Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So like what the other panelists said, I think I can build some facts on that by saying that a lot of research institution right now runs on OpenStack. And it is time that OpenStack should go closer to those people to find out the challenges that they are facing on some of their workloads. Now, AI in general is a name that could be overused. We have to know each particular aspect of AI. For example, they are talking about generative AI. Not everyone now has that capability to do generative AI with infrastructure. But we need to get involved. We could start with other deployments. There are so many algorithms that and big institutions that are doing things differently. We could start from a small workload on use cases, and then we start growing. But above all, we need to learn and understand from the end users. For example, in Canada, there are so many, like Compute Canada and many others are run on OpenStack, even though they may have multi-cloud, but OpenStack is one of them. If they have been using OpenStack for a very long time, they have seen some values. So we cannot sit back and just say, okay, they are using us, but what are the challenges? Because I remember around 2020, one researcher was about to spin some workloads for what he wanted to develop an algorithm. But the technicians that were running the clusters could not, the communication between this researcher and the technical team did not go well. And they had to abandon it and use services from Amazon. It wasn't something that they could not do, but that level of communication made the guy to come closer to say, okay, I've had this challenge, come to the community. Like this AI community that we are about to start, there are so many other communities that you can partner with them. ML Common is there, they are running HPC workloads. You have so many other universities that are actually doing works on these areas. I remember even last year I was teaching a course on cyber physical system, AI for cyber physical system. One of the platforms we were using, Amazon gave us some limited but free accounts. At some point in time, we ran into serious difficulties because when we wanted to train some models, with the limited resources, we could not even have flexibilities of doing any adjustment or modification. Half of the class said, but why can't we use OpenStack? At that point, I was convinced, I said, okay, write a petition so we can take it to the school, but it never went through because it was already at the beginning of the academic year. Now, people who are working at OpenStack, I think you should make more collaborations with research institutions because not all the big models are effective. Start with small, powerful, like the ones that are coming up right now. We have seen that smaller models, I just worked on a project that we're doing a generative code model. We wanted to replicate a work that OpenAI did like 2021. At some point, we fell into difficulties because we could not replicate that work. We don't have that resources. So we improvise smaller models and bypass this, and we had similar results in so many areas. And that is where I think OpenStack can really come handy. I think I'll continue later, but let's.
I'll add
Please.
one more thing. So kind of tying it back to what you had talked about, like the open source community, improving the AI workloads in space, and building on what you were just talking about, how like the cross-functional groups that we can participate in. One of the things that OpenStack does extremely well is expose hardware accelerators and virtual functions, which is, whether you're working on, your telecommunications workloads, or you're doing your 5G, 4G, VNFs, or you're just trying to attach to an FPGA. Like the capability is already there because open source and OpenStack has done the work to make that accessible. And now, why that's important is because exactly what you were just saying, start with smaller models doesn't mean you have to start with an H100 or an A30 or a Flex GPU or the latest and greatest MI300 from AMD. You could start with on-chip accelerators or on-board accelerators, and because OpenStack has those virtual functions capabilities that you can tie into and schedule intelligently against to get that higher density out of it, you can do really, really incredible things with this platform, all because of the work that you have all done.
Well, and I think you all did you have a comment? No. Okay, I think you all set up my next question. And before I ask it, I want to say, this is totally open. I will run the mic to anyone who wants to ask a question or contribute a perspective, because we're all learning together. So please raise your hand at any point, and we'll figure out how to work it in. But something I think you all touched on is, there's work to be done. I was actually talking, I'm going to call him out. Gotham is here. Hey. He's the chair of the OpenStack TC, and we were talking last night at the 15th birthday happy hour about this AI working group, right? And one of the most strategic outcomes of it that I'm very committed to doing is that it's not just us talking about what are people doing and what needs to happen, but it's connecting back to the upstream community and saying, these are the gaps, these are the opportunities. I actually, 1 year ago almost, Caracal or 2024.1 came out and introduced vGPU live migration. It changed the game for a lot of organizations who are building their AI strategies, and I've recently just talked to a company in Vietnam. They have it in production, and their customers are really happy. So one of the questions I have for y'all, it wasn't in the preparation, but I'm curious, is what can the upstream OpenStack community, what do we need to be focusing on? What are some of the software gaps that y'all have experienced or you've identified that we need to start thinking about long-term solutions for if we want our community, our software, and our collaboration to remain relevant and used?
I'm going to just borrow from philosophy in that case, because I think it does. Well, it goes back to this one, which is we don't know yet,
Yeah.
honestly, right? So I would say you want to we need a pipeline of listening, right?
Yeah.
What are people doing? I always say, because I've been into this stuff for a while, I used to introduce Hugging Face to people, and people would look at me like, what? That's not a real thing. No, that's a real thing, right? But it takes us a bit to get used to. This is a new community. You got to learn the new lingo. You got to figure out what the strengths, weaknesses are. Maybe we're going to be a hardware enabler. We enable other large companies to come into this space to compete against NVIDIA or something like that, because there's flexibility, and we actually will do that, right? The big clouds are like, I got my model fixed. I'm going to got my discount. That's my thing, and I just move on. Maybe they're going to go build their own, right? This wouldn't surprise me at some point, or maybe they're doing it already if somebody else knows. It wouldn't surprise me, right? If AWS or something, they have the clout to do that, and they're not going to pay the NVIDIA prices, right? But maybe we fit in like that. That one's a tricky one. So I would say, I think I'd love other people's opinions to learn where we could focus. And maybe there's something also, I know with like Zool and stuff, that there's companies are donating hardware and access. Maybe we could do that too. You could ask companies like us to do that. I don't know if that's right or helpful, but it probably could be. Yeah. So unfortunately, tell me. Yeah. Who wants to go?
I think that I don't have anything I would add to what you said. I think it's really perfect. We need to engage in this period of listening. I think as a community, we also need to figure out, what Brian Lilly, one of our leaders, used to say is we be less of a propeller head, and figure out how we bring the technology to these people so that they can use it in an interesting and exciting way that isn't create if you're ever trying to work with virtual functions in Nova, it is a special kind of hell when you first get started, but it's really easy to get to do once you figure it out. But figuring it out is that like quantum leap that you have to take. So I would say that we need to figure out a better way, or at least a nice way to figure out how to, more easily enable these functions, so that it doesn't require all of the propeller heads to run the platform.
Yeah. So I want to look at it from a perspective where, since you mentioned the upstream, upstream to me should take a proactive measures. For example, Olama is an open source AI model. And the benefit of OpenStack is that it is in a modular form. You don't have to run all the projects to get it spin up. Going closer to Olama, look at their interface. Can you integrate this with Horizon? Can you integrate this with some of the projects that are existing to bring out values? Because the whole aspect of machine learning is that if you can collect massive amount of data, process them, and then try to make the visualization of this data meaningful to the end users. No matter how Hugging Face is popular today, it still needs help in so many areas that the community members don't want to dedicate time. They are running behind or ahead of the trend, and that is some areas that creates gap where the upstream can say, okay, we have had experience of building good APIs where we can query multimodal AI system and then leverage it on OpenStack dashboards. So these are challenges that the upstream can just leverage right now, and you have values. And then you make OpenStack more attractive. Yeah, so I think one way of doing that, and I will still go back to the same premises I made earlier, go closer to most research institutions. They need help from OpenStack and they get so little. And some of them are frustrated. Yeah.
Well, and I think something you hit on, and I think it's been a conversation that we've all been having throughout this week and in our ongoing jobs, and is, we are one, or OpenStack is one open source project, we're one community, but there's a lot out there. So what other groups should we be collaborating with? Who else should we be learning from? Because I think if we just learn from within, it becomes really insular and we are actually not expanding our knowledge and what our technology should do. So from y'all's interactions, or like, we've mentioned Hugging Face, we've mentioned Llama, we've mentioned DeepSeek, like, who should we be reaching out to? Who should we ensure that they're actually coming within the OpenStack community, or we're going to them and we're learning from each other to ensure maybe integration, maybe just positive learnings and alignment, but what do y'all think?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
I think one way of learning in this modern era is to bring out something that I have been trying your model and this is what I have done. But I found, I ran into these difficulties. Everybody wants to know that you are bringing some influence or some affirmation from what they are doing. Okay, if you go to Hugging Face, I will still cite it again. They have one section of their online portal where they keep track of every paper that has been published based on Hugging Face community. That is one area that I think OpenStack can just invest a little bit of time. Researchers like to see their work outside. And once they know that you are recognizing them just by doing that, they want, others will see, oh, I saw what is happening in that community. There are so many ways of bringing these incentive ways of attracting people. But above all, most people are building models, as I mentioned earlier. They still have some user interface issues. Mm-hmm. And then they have, like my talk today, I was also mentioning about explainability. Mm-hmm. It is not about building a model. Once that model is out there, that is when the real engineering work begins. You have an engineering system. This is where we can come up and say, okay, the best model that exists on this planet Earth, after a period of time, that model would degrade in performance. It is natural. That is why in machine learning, after a period of time, they have to retrain the model. If not, the properties would degrade and the model will start giving wrong performance. Knowing those basic, or I could say knowing all those limitations of machine learning, we already have OpenStack with so many projects. Now start looking into some of those projects to say, okay, We have these projects that does this monitoring, that does this observability, that does this. OpenStack already aligns perfectly well with Kubernetes. So scaling things could not really be a whole lot of issue based on the workload that small and medium-sized enterprises are doing. We may not start by running onto very big workloads and some things like that, but making this impact and looking for gaps, then bring those value to the people. Everyone will want to see, oh yeah, you did this. I've been thinking about this, but I don't have time. Now that you have started it, let's keep on with this discussion. A lot of these kind of things that I'm mentioning are happening out there. Most people have good products, but the user interface or the experience is sometimes crappy. Even OpenAI, I don't like the interface. But then what can you do? I mean, so some of these innovative things can start from the upstream. Yeah. And then people start making contribution. Then you see it becomes now a service that you provide functionalities to multimodal community. Mm-hmm. You stay agnostic, yeah.
I'll follow up on that because this concept, which I think you were saying, which is this is in my own head, so it may not be apps at all what you said, but
it's 5 p.m. It's okay.
Right. Well, what I was thinking about, like, part of our problem, I think, sometimes is OpenStack is sharing the abilities of OpenStack, and so I'll share like a very specific story. We have a customer, one of our favorite customers, very very large for us. And they were struggling. So they were already overrunning a bunch of stuff on OpenStack, got a bunch of clusters in different locations. And they came in and they were like, they're running Databricks on top of AWS or Azure or something like that. And they're just like, this is killing me. But I know I can't move it over here. And I was like, oh, okay. Why do you say, and this guy's cool, he's got like an Isaac Asimov t-shirt and everything, so I'm like, yes, you can. You should know that. But I'm thinking like maybe the connection there is us being more vocal, publishing, this is the workloads that are running on OpenStack. And we can do the AI ones, of course. This is like part of it. But it's also like one of our engineers is like super smart. Once we convinced him that like, hey, you could build a Databricks, the true open source version of Databricks. And so he went and did that. He took I don't know, 6 weeks or whatever, and like fired up the traditional one, you know, so it's Debezium talking to Kafka dumping into Delta Lake being read by Spark, and then Spark, the big Spark cluster's got a bunch of stuff connecting to it, right? That's all pure open source, and it's all 100% on OpenStack. But we had to teach the customer that no, absolutely, we can do that. Like, and in fact, this is the fundamentals underneath. And as soon as they understood that, they're like, oh, well, now I can do this. Oh, I don't need to do this other thing that I used to have to do. It saves my people a whole bunch of time to actually process the data through there. My batch processes are better, et cetera. So I don't know, maybe that's the idea is that we take a little more time to publish what OpenStack can do. And it's proof that it can do that, which we all in the space already know it, but you got to share it.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know if that's the way. Maybe it's the one.
Oh, yeah. Audience participation, I love it.
Yeah. All right, I mean, this is interesting, right? I'm like connecting the dots here. So you asked the question like, who should I go partner with? So I'm ex-Intel, so I was like breathing accelerators on. And now I'm on the other side, like I'm working on the customer side of the company, right? I'm from Rackspace. So I wish I had the access to all the people that I'm talking to when I was there, right? So you speak about like, okay, I'm an open source community. I have all this great things that I want to do, like reduce the power consumption, bring all the power to cloud computing to real people and stuff. Hugging Face started with the same thing, right? I want to make sure that AI models are accessible. You know, like people can go, you know, build it for their own applications and stuff. But they are in their AI domain, and I see OpenStack is in the infra domain. The real connection would happen when these two talk. The reason I say it, there is a lot of corporate thing going on in Hugging Face too. If I want to like go access the AI models, it's all NVIDIA underneath. So they have amazingly created the stickiness. So what happens with it? I mean, like, I love NVIDIA, I love Jensen, right? So, but what happens?
for Intel.
I work for Intel, but I still love them, right? So, I mean, like, he's made some bold, amazing decisions which has created that stickiness to their products. But I wish it was not just the GPUs alone. right? Because I mean, if you look at it, we have so much research on, even if you take a CPU-based workload, it's only 30% of the CPU is being utilized at a given time. And you have all of this change of the type of workloads that keeps happening. So there is a shift in, how much CPU is being consumed and how much power, how much cooling and all of that. And when AI is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, and you kind of, there's so much of marketing that's been done, like AI equals GPU equals, all that, right? And like, how do you even make people go and look at other accelerators and CPUs?
I think
So-
it's just going to take some time. You mentioned AMX before, so right,
Yeah.
that's the 4th generation,
Yeah.
and so there is some accelerators already in the cores. I realized so it's attached to the core.
Yeah.
Yeah, you probably know better than I do, actually, right? So, and then it's the 5th generation made it better. The 6th generation is
Yeah.
now also specifically addressing that, and they separated into the E cores and P cores.
Yeah.
So yeah, it feels like there is going to be multiple solutions, and that's why I say try it on the
It is,
CPU.
It is, but the real
Yeah.
customers don't have access to it because they are looking at like, oh, am I looking at my Kafka workload or Databricks workload? So it goes back to your point of like, hey, I want to talk to my customer, understand their workload, make sure that I put it on an OpenStack platform so it actually works. Right, so then how do you partner with somebody like Hugging Face, and goes to his point of, let's start small, right? Like what kind of smaller AI workloads that you can take, and then you have access to like, hey, Kevin said like, hey, you can access a CPU or an accelerator or a GPU, FPGAs, anything you want, and that's probably something you create POC type of platforms for customers, and community can help with the reach and stuff. That'd be amazing for saving power and cooling and everything.
Yeah, and I think one of the points I'm trying to make is OpenStack already does it. Like, it's CPU. It's already efficiently handling this stuff. So you can run these models directly in a VM today, right? You can just go do that. So that's the entry point. And I think I would count on all of the manufacturers will continue to improve that, right? Because Intel wants to get into the business. Of course, GPUs didn't quite get the business they want, so put it in the CPU. Makes sense on their part, right? AMD I'm less familiar with, but I'm sure they're following a similar pattern.
Yeah, they have similar. Well, like, I mean, like the AMD GPU capabilities with like the MI3 or 300s, 210s, et cetera, they have a lot of the same features and functionality. It's what doesn't work great is the software. The hardware is incredible if you can find the right platform to run the workload against it. I think where NVIDIA has a leg up on pretty much everybody is the fact that everybody supports CUDA.
Yeah.
And this is where I think that DeepSeek kind of exposed that as you don't really need that if you construct your software in a slightly different way. So this is where I think we are at. If the open source communities can kind of rally behind that mantra, that idea that it isn't CUDA or die, and that, oh, what?
Sorry.
Yep. Then, yeah. I think if the open source community can embrace the fact that CUDA is not the end all be all, it may be something great, but it is not something that is required, then I think we can get to the point where people are using accelerators, people are using specialized instruction sets, people are using AVX or FPGAs that are available, and taking advantage of all of the incredible features and functions that a platform like OpenStack natively provides.
Can I riff on that for a second? I was sitting here thinking the whole time, and as soon as you brought that up, it kind of catalyzed in my head. And I'm thinking, two things really resonated with me. One is when you said that the hardware is great, but the software part isn't great. Yeah. And second is it doesn't have to be CUDA. And I think that really points out to where I think personally, as someone who's done open source for 20, 30 years, now that's I think the opportunity for OpenStack is how do we build a framework that, like, we're talking about AI now, but it could be other things. Just the same way we built a framework for NFV, we built a framework for pluggable networking back in the early days, just with Neutron and ML2, yeah, quantum. Sorry, but I think that's the level of thinking where I really would hope that OpenStack can take leadership. Is like, hey, let's build an AI framework where it can be multi-model, it can be multi-technology, but then when someone comes in, there is that user interface, there is that way to plug in a model, there is that way to, run the learning or the retraining, and that way it's accessible, right? It's putting it in front of the end users, and for the people who are providing the technology, it can be done through, Intel processor, it can be done through NVIDIA and CUDA, it can be done through AMD, it can be done through, I was just reading about someone who's trying to come up with I think it's Zeus, is trying to come up with a new GPU that is like 1/5 the cost of NVIDIA. And granted, there's definitely, I think we're going to see more stuff like that, the DeepMind type of think outside of the box, where it's, hey, if I can deliver 80% of the GPU at 20% of the price, then maybe it's not as good as CUDA, but people will then build models around that can then take advantage of that and completely upend the economics. So I think, to be just as a member of the community and as someone who's done this before, I think that framework is really where we can excel.
Okay. Yeah. Just to add on what you were saying and the previous question, I will say that GPU is great. CPU is even better, but do we need it in all cases? Now, if we are doing high-level computations with massive amounts of data, okay, we can be talking about CPUs at this point. But then if our workload is mostly working on, let's say, natural language processing or any aspect of language models, we have a lot and tons of pre-trained models already available where CPU can do a good job fine-tuning. My laptop here is not even the latest. I wanted to, for my presentation, I was training, doing fine-tuning of OpenStack code base, some aspect of it, not the entire code base. So the model that I started with was 7 billion parameter model from Hugging Face. At some point, it was like frying up my system. I said, but why should I kill this system for this work? I started just doing some more findings and investigation. I saw a 66 million parameter model, which did incredible work and gave me the best performance that I could imagine. I don't have GPU on my laptop, I have CPU. And when I saw the result, I was so pleased. So most people want to say the bigger the better, but many other research institutions from Meta, from Stanford and MIT have proven to us that smaller models can do a greater work. And just to provoke more situation right now, AI, the way we were thinking of software engineering 1.0 is moving fast at 3.0 with agentic AI, which means we will need smaller models to run on agents. And those agents will become now the new, what name should I give them? We will be managers of those agents. Right now, we are at that level where programming is no longer a job of a software engineer. Many code-generated models exist now that can generate good functional code. The work of a software engineer now will be to review those codes and to run test cases. And then AI agents now will spin up and do most of the jobs. We don't need those fancy large models to run on agents, smaller unit, and that is where OpenStack really comes handy. Just to conclude on this topic, look at Amazon. The CEO started by selling books. We all know that. At some point that we know from his, from the storyline, he almost like, what am I going to do when businesses are going down and all this massive amount of data I've collected over time? Internet was at his doorpost. From all his intelligence and inquiry, internet with that data, he spin up something that is so massive today. Don't waste your many years of experience, innovations, and building product. Look that vision of Amazon and say, okay, OpenStack have been doing this business. We have well-structured community and many have learned from us. Just leverage it now to a new adventure direction. And think about agentic solution. It will bring many breakthroughs. I believe so.
So we are actually at the time. Did you have were you about to?
No, I was just
Yeah.
going to say, OpenVino, look that up if you're interested in CPU, doing like inference on CPU. Help me out. There's a couple other ones that I should know that were on a slide deck that I gave somebody else's presentation that I didn't know what was on that slide. But OpenVino, with one API, yes, thank you. Yeah, exactly. So OpenVino and one API. Just look that up if you're interested in that. And again, it lets you get involved without having to like, oh my God, I got to get an H100, which is ridiculous, right? And one rack to run your one server. Or yeah, go ahead.
No. Well, I think that the interesting thing, one of my biggest takeaways is like, there's still a lot of unknowns. Like there are things that we need to figure out, we need to learn. But to Ken's point that I want to draw back to is like, we also need to be leaders in developing those materials, developing those learnings, getting the right people in to share their stories. And it's actually exactly what the OpenInfra for AI working group is poised to do. We are starting with OpenStack, given that there are some proven production scenarios already out there that we're trying to schedule architectural show and tells that we can publish, that we can open up for a public Q&A and say, you know, there's a lot of architectural decisions that go into supporting an AI workload. Like, you know, Madhvi highlighted some, the panel highlighted some, and I think hearing what's working, hearing what those challenges are, and then funneling that back to other operators, but more importantly, in my opinion, to the upstream community to ensure we're all working together. That's what the OpenInfra community, I think, is really poised to do right now, and we're at a really opportune time because we are still at the beginning to be leaders in this space and make sure that our projects integrate in the right places and remain relevant. But like I said, we ran over by 4 minutes already. I do want to thank my amazing panelists. I thought it was a really great discussion. Yeah. And actually, it feels strange to say, and I want to take a picture of how many people are in a room at 5:49 on a Friday afternoon. So I want to also thank y'all for being here. I hope it was interesting. I know this is actually about to be the closing remarks for the event. So as someone from the OpenInfra Foundation, I just want to thank all of y'all for being here this week. I've had incredible conversations with a lot of you. This is a good bookend to it, but we got to keep these conversations going offline as well. So if you ping people on IRC, on Slack, on email, and if you can't find people, Allison at openinfra.org or .dev, I'll find them. So thank you all. I'm going to take a picture just because that's who I am. But yeah, and then I will pass it to Helena for closing remarks, I think. All right.